Hey everyone, it's Bree here from Blossom and Branch Farm, and today I wanted to show you how to grow a medicinal cutting garden. So lately here at the farm we've been growing more native plants, and we've also been growing a lot of plants that have multifunctions. So things that are good as a cut flower but also maybe have another purpose, such as an edible flower or an herb. So today we're going to be talking about specifically cut flowers that can also be used as medicinal flowers. We're going to go over some of the uses of some of these flowers, and we're going to do another 4x8 garden plan for you so that you know exactly what to do and where to plant things. Also, just a reminder, when you are looking at these plants, we do recommend starting from seed if you can. If you can't, make sure you seek out a good nursery that you know is not using pesticides in their growing. Unfortunately, the nursery industry is rife with pesticides in production, and you don't want to be using those plants for medicinal purposes, obviously. So make sure you're trying to grow from seed whenever you can. So just like our last two cutting garden plans, we're doing a standard 4x8 foot bed. Now, if you have a smaller bed, you can always adjust downward the amount of plants that you have in here. Just follow the same height recommendations and make sure that you're planning for which way is north so that you know to put your taller plants on the north side of your garden. So I have my 4x8 garden gridded out. I have 4 feet here and I have 8 feet here. And that way we just know exactly where everything is going to go and how much space everything needs. This is a great way to plan out your garden in the spring. Now, all of the plants that we're going to be talking about today do best in full sun, and because a lot of them are native, they are more tolerant of rocky soils and kind of poor soils. The only one that you really need to be thinking about in terms of fertility and good soil quality is going to be your roses. And the ones that we're going to go through today are going to be, again, multifunction, so ones that you can use and cut for vases and arrangements and bouquets, and also ones that you can use medicinally. And all of the plants that we've selected for this cutting garden are mostly the well-behaved versions. So for example, bee balm, we'll be talking about the specific variety of bee balm because many of the bee balms, which are in the mint family, tend to spread via underground rhizome, so they might take over your garden bed if you're not careful. So the one that we're going to recommend specifically we chose because it's more well-behaved. So just bear that in mind as we're going through some of these varietals. The other benefit is a lot of these plants are native, and that's always wonderful for serving our specialist pollinators as well. So the first one that we're going to be talking about today is anise hyssop. And anise hyssop is actually a short-lived perennial. So many of these plants that we're going to be talking about today are short-lived perennials. So anise hyssop is a great plant. I love it for cutting because it has kind of a purple spike flower. It's very pretty in the garden. It's a favorite of our bumblebees, and it's a native plant to North America. The other benefit is it tastes wonderful. So many of these plants are medicinal, but maybe they don't have the best taste. Anise hyssop is one of my favorites. It makes a great ice cream. You can make a simple syrup out of it for lemonades or cocktails. It has sort of a licoricey sweet taste, and if you pick a leaf and just eat the leaf straight, it actually tastes slightly sweet. So that's going to be the first one we're going to be putting in this garden on the north side because it gets the tallest, 3 to 4 feet tall. And we mentioned this one is a short-lived perennial, so usually about 2 or 3 years is what you're looking at in your garden depending on your soil type and how much sun it gets. Anise hyssop is an easy one to start from seed as well. It does benefit from a 2-week cold stratification period if you can, but you can also get germination without that cold stratification. It just might not germinate as well. In terms of uses for your anise hyssop, you can make it into a tea, you can make it into a tincture. We mentioned that you can cook with it. You can use it as an herbal steam, so put it in some hot water, put your face over it, and take a nice deep breath. And the benefits of anise hyssop when we're talking about medicinal, now remember, I'm not a doctor, so please consult your physician before you start using herbs for medicinal purposes to make sure you're not having any interactions with any other medicines you might be on or other health complications. All right, there's my disclaimer. But anise hyssop is really good for respiratory issues and also for digestion. So we mentioned putting it in a bowl of water and letting that steam rise up, and taking some nice deep breaths of that anise hyssop in a steam is a really nice way to use it. So we'll be putting those anise hyssop down here, and we will be doing 1 per square foot because they do spread and get large, and they are a short-lived perennial. So remember, whenever we have a short-lived perennial or a perennial at all, we want to plan for it to grow and get bigger. So we want to make sure we give it that space. So here we have anise hyssop, and we have 4. The next one we're going to be talking about is coneflower, also known as Echinacea purpurea or Echinacea angustifolia. Both do well, but Echinacea purpurea tends to be easier to grow in the home garden and also easier to start from seed. So that's the one we're recommending, but Echinacea angustifolia also works. So Echinacea can also be started from seed. I do like to have a cold stratification on that one as well, so I put it into the freezer for about 2 weeks before I try to germinate it. And then once you get those germinated, they actually grow quite well. They're fairly drought tolerant. They're pretty carefree, honestly, except they do tend to suffer from a disease called Astor's yellows, which can produce a proliferation, it looks like, of petals at the top of the bloom. If you find your plants are getting that Astor's yellows, you'll want to remove it. It's just something to keep an eye on because it can spread to other plants. Echinacea comes in lots of different colors. The straight native version is the purple, and you can use the blooms, you can use the roots, or you can use the leaves of Echinacea medicinally. But most people use the flowers because they don't want to dig up the whole plant, but the root actually has the most powerful medicinal properties. It is perennial. It does get quite tall, 3 to 4 feet tall. Like I mentioned, comes in a lot of different colors, but some of those cultivars usually you can only get as plants, and I usually question whether they are grown pesticide-free. So I like to go with the straight native versions like Echinacea purpurea or Echinacea angustifolia. Any that you're starting from seed also will be fine. Echinacea can be made into a tincture, can be used as a tea, as a poultice, and also can be made into a syrup. And you can use it in a few different ways. It's an anti-inflammatory, it's also antimicrobial, it's immunity stimulating, and it's good for lymph function. So a good all around, plus beautiful for the cutting garden. We like to cut them fresh, and then I also like what they bring to the garden in the off season in terms of architecture. These plants also offer great bird food in the winter, so that's an added benefit. So our Echinacea are going to be going here, and they are the next tallest plant, which is why we're going to be moving them in over here. I'm going to be putting in 4 Echinaceas. Now, depending on the variety, they may not get as large as the straight native version. So remember that you can put in more if you want, if you're growing a varietal that gets smaller. But because I'm planning on growing Echinacea purpurea, which is our straight native, I know that they do get large, especially in year 2. So we will be putting 4 of those, 1 per square foot. Okay, next up we have roses, and who doesn't love a rose? I adore roses for their smell, for their look, for their beauty, for cutting, and also for syrups and for use in baking and crafts and medicinally. So really great multi-purpose plant. And we use the flowers, you can use the rose hips, and you can also use the leaves of roses. You'll want to seek out a version that is highly scented. So again, be careful where you're sourcing because bare root is going to be best if you can, instead of buying them in a pot where you're not sure what's in that soil. If you can seek out a native version, they are going to be hardier. So if you're trying to make a drought tolerant garden specifically, a native version is going to be more in tune with your own soil. You're not going to have to do a lot of amending to your soil or extra care for those native versions of roses. So do some research into what's native to your area, or you can seek out a hybrid rose. Any of these hybrid roses will also work, but I do like to go for one that has a strong scent. And that's because you can use rose for a variety of things. You can use it as a hydrosol. As a hydrosol, you'll want to go with a scented rose. You can also use it in a tincture, you can use it in a tea, in a salve. So lots of great uses for rose. And what do we use it for? So rose is a little bit unique. It also has some anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties, but it also serves as an aphrodisiac, and it can serve as a diuretic. So great purposes for rose, but also a really beautiful one to have in your cut garden. So we're putting in roses next. Now, next up, we're going to be putting in our roses. So the roses I give at least 2 feet, and I'm going to be selecting somewhat of a taller rose. Ideally, you'll be putting these into an obelisk. So an obelisk kind of forms a little bit of a tower that's going to hold these, and that's just going to help give a little bit of vertical shape to your garden. So we're going to just roughly draw in those 2 obelisks here, and we'll have our roses. They'll be trained up inside that obelisk, which will help keep them contained. So rose, and you can grow 2 different roses. You don't have to grow 2 of the same, so that you can get more color options for your cut garden. Next up we have our bee balm. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video that bee balm is one that can get aggressive if you put it in the garden at its a certain variety, so one of the ones that spreads via underground rhizomes. So there is a variety of bee balm that is an annual, so you're not going to have to worry about that aggressiveness, especially if you're planting in a raised bed. So that is going to be lemon bee balm. Lemon bee balm also happens to be one of the more visually beautiful bee balms, so great for a cutting garden. It kind of looks like a little bit of a Dr. Seuss flower, and it has a lemony scent to it. The pollinators absolutely adore bee balm. I think everyone should grow bee balm in their garden, but again, also great for cuts. Lemon bee balm is also easy to grow from seed. It is an annual, it's quite showy. So we're looking at about 2 to 3 feet tall for that lemon bee balm variety. Bee balm has high levels of thymol, which is an antifungal and an antibacterial. And it's good for the respiratory system, so you can do that one in a steam inhalation. It's also good for your digestive and your nervous system. You can make it into a tea, a tincture, a salve, an infused oil or vinegar, or even a poultice. So bee balm is going to be next going into our garden. Bee balm also tends to get large, but not quite as large as the roses, but we are still going to give it 1 foot because they do get large. Now remember, this is the annual version, but bee balms can be prone to powdery mildew, so we want to make sure we're not overcrowding those. Next up on our list, we have calendula, and I love growing calendula in the cutting garden because it's very easy to start from seed, so that's one perk. Calendula can be a very healthy self-seeder, so be sure that you're deadheading, and that's easy to do if you're growing this medicinally because you're going to want to be using the flowers of the calendula, because the flowers of the calendula are the part that contains the most medicinal properties. So all you do is you just grab and pull off the flower of that calendula, which helps keep it deadheaded and thus keeps it from growing to seed. But we do want to make sure we're not growing too many because they can proliferate quite quickly. In terms of colors, the most commonly used ones medicinally are going to be the oranges and the yellows, just the regular calendulas, but they do come in a lot of different colors, and those ones do have medicinal benefits as well. So if you want to select for color because you're going for a cutting garden, there's some beautiful ones like zeolites that are quite lovely. You can really select whatever color is going to work best for your cutting garden. Calendula is usually an annual, but it can be a short-lived perennial if you're in zone 8 or above. You can use this one as well in teas, tinctures. It also really shines in salves or body butters, so really wonderful for skincare uses. And its benefits include that it's an antifungal, it's antimicrobial, it's antioxidant, it's anti-inflammatory, it's anti a lot of things. And it's also good for wound healing and the lymphatic system. We mentioned skincare uses and wound healing. I actually use calendula to infuse an oil that I use to make a salve, and it works really well on my kids if they have rashes. One of my daughters has eczema, and so it really works well for those purposes. So calendula is going to be next. But remember, not too many because they really grow. They really proliferate. They're very floriferous. And this is where down here toward the end of this garden bed, it's going to get a little bit more unruly. So it'll look a little more natural here toward the front instead of those rows. So here we'll be doing calendulas, and I'm actually going to do 2 per square foot, and that'll just allow you to do a little bit more variety if you'd like to. So I'm going to be putting in those calendulas here. I'm actually going to just do 1 more here, so that's a total of 5 calendula. After that, we're going to do one of my personal favorites, lavender. Now you may know, if you follow me already, you may know that we love lavender. I turned my whole front yard into a lavender farm. You can go back and watch that video if you'd like to, but we love lavender here, but you don't need much if you're just a single family and you're using it for personal purposes, because one lavender plant will produce a lot, especially after the first season. They kind of take off slowly, so the first season they might be a little bit smaller, but after that first year they really start putting off a lot, and you can usually get 2 harvests. Now there's different varieties of lavender. What we recommend for the medicinal one is the English lavenders. Those are the ones most commonly used medicinally anyway. And those are going to be the lavender angustifolias. So you can usually get 1 harvest off of those lavenders in the early summer, and then usually I get another cutting in the fall. And lavender is really great as a calming herb. It has a sedative property, so good for bedtime teas. Also really great in salves if you have the capability to make essential oils, if you have someone who can distill things. And while you can start lavender from seed, it is fairly difficult and they tend to have a lower germination rate. So if you can get it as a cutting, you can root cuttings. If you have a friend who has lavender, they're very easy to root cuttings from. Or you can try just buying the plants, but again, make sure you trust and you check with your nursery that they aren't using pesticides. So you can use lavender in baking, in cooking, makes a great ice cream. You can make it into syrups, infusions, tinctures, teas, salves, compresses, infused vinegars, infused oils, so lots of uses. It has sedative properties, so good for the nervous system, good for calming. It's good for the digestive system, so it eases nausea and gas. It's also a good topical anti-inflammatory. So I also put the lavender into that salve that I mentioned before. I usually infuse my almond oil with calendula and lavender to get all of those anti-inflammatory benefits into my salves. And I'll be filming and showing how we make that salve as well, so make sure you subscribe to get access to that. So lavender is going to be going in next. It does take up quite a bit of room, so you want to give it about 2 feet by 2 feet. I'm putting it into this raised bed, so you'll just need to remember when you are cleaning out your garden in the spring that you don't want to remove any of these perennials. I just leave all of these in all of winter, so you don't have to clean up this garden in the fall. The great thing about this garden is it's good for the birds. We mentioned lots of seeds on these plants, the Echinacea, the anise, hyssop, all create great seeds that the birds like. So good to leave it in the fall, let it stay in all through winter, and then in the spring, you can see what's coming back up. And our lavender is going to spread as well, but we are going to be keeping it trimmed back, and that's going to be key to containing it within our raised bed. Now, if you don't want to put it into your raised bed, remember you can move it to a different spot in your landscape, but for this purpose, we're going to assume that we just have our one raised bed to work with, and we'll be putting our lavender into that raised bed. All right, we're almost toward the end here. Okay, so next up we have lemon balm, and this one may perennialize in your zone. You can also grow it as an annual. It's a great filler flower, so when we're talking about cut flowers, we usually use lemon balm for the foliage, and the leaves are very medicinal as well as the flowers. Now you do want to keep the flowers dead-headed if it does flower, because they can drop a lot of seeds and then it can get a little bit weedy or messy. So just be sure you're dead-heading them or cutting them and bringing them indoors. You can turn this one into teas, tinctures, an infused honey, a pesto. It's also really good in lemonade, so make a simple syrup and sweeten your lemonade with it for a lemon balm lemonade. It's really delicious in the summertime. And it also has a lot of culinary uses, so you can use it in compound butters, and it's not just medicinal, it's edible, and it's a great cut flower filler. Starting this one from seed, it's best to cold stratify it for a couple weeks if you can. Put it in the freezer for 2 weeks and do a moist stratification, and then pull it out and germinate it with bottom heat. We mentioned you can use the leaves and the flowers of the lemon balm, and they have a soothing kind of sedative property similar to lavender. Lemon balm has antiviral, antifungal, antimicrobial properties. It also is an uplifting herb, so it can be good if you're experiencing some seasonal affective depression. It can just be a nice tea that kind of gives you a little bit of an uplifting boost. And that is one that I like to dry, and then I use in teas throughout the winter because it is good for that kind of uplifting, fresh quality. Now down over here, we will be putting our lemon balm. So I'm gonna do 2 lemon balms. They do get bushy as they get older. So roughly 1 lemon balm per square foot. All right, last up we have Tulsi, or holy basil, and this is one that we use when it goes to flower once it's gotten woody down at the base of the stem. It has a really lovely smell, probably the one that has the widest variety of medicinal uses. So you can start Tulsi from seed. It prefers to have a bottom heat source, so a heat mat underneath while it's germinating. It is an annual for most of us because it is frost sensitive, so unless you live in an area that doesn't get frost, it's going to be an annual. So you want to plant this one out after your last frost. You can harvest this one for the leaves and for the flowers as well. If you're using it as a cut flower, you'll want to make sure you're harvesting it when the base of the stem is woody. That way it holds in the vase, otherwise it's going to flop. Holy basil can be made into an infusion, a tincture, a tea, pesto, an infused oil, a poultice, and the benefits are wide-ranging for holy basil. It's an antioxidant. It's an adaptogen, it's an antifungal, can serve as a mild antidepressant, it's a diuretic, it's an expectorant, it's anti-inflammatory. So it has lots of functions, but that also means that it potentially has lots of interactions. So make sure that you're checking, like we mentioned, with a physician if you are questioning whether it has any interactions with any medications you might be on. And those will be doing 2 per square foot. So go ahead and take your screenshot now. Okay, so now hopefully we feel ready to tackle a medicinal and beautiful cutting garden for the summer. Now remember, a lot of these herbs are dryable. So calendula, for example, we will bring in to dry, and then we remove the petals and we save those dried petals. Same for roses. We can hang up our lemon balm to dry. Same for the bee balm and the anise hyssop. So remember that these things are not just harvestable during the growing season. You can dry them and use them year round. So a great option if you want a multifunctional garden that is beautiful, it serves pollinators, and it's going to be medicinal for you. Hi guys, if you enjoyed this, please give us a like and a subscribe. We really appreciate it, and it really helps us out here at the farm. We'll see you next time in the cutting garden.